So I'll give the floor now to Iris van der Tuin. Is that something like that? All right. Not too far, at least. Okay. Iris, she is professor at Gender Studies and Philosophy of Science at Utrecht University. Thanks for accepting our challenge. Actually, that is extended to all of you. And yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation, of course, and also for this wonderful space. I'm honored to have been invited here because performance studies is not my field. I do epistemology in the context of gender studies. So I'm really excited to speak from my own location, feminism in the Netherlands, gender studies in the Netherlands. And I hope to arrive at some statements or tools that I hope extend beyond my context. And what I'm trying to get at is, in a way, related, I think, to what the three previous speakers have tried to do, trying to figure out the indirections, so to speak, in the directions with which we are thinking, and via which we are taught, for instance, to think. What I'm trying and I'm trying to do that from my feminist work, and I will actually use my own location in feminism as a launchpad to create some thoughts on indirections in the gridded structure through which we are taught to think. And so let me start right away. Feminism is all around us, and it's even around us here in Montemor, because yesterday I saw some strong women carrying women and men, helping them to cross the street at some abandoned train station. So feminism is all around us. Consider the fully implemented emancipation policies, the steps toward gender quotas in European governmental representation. Look at the punk feminism of Pussy Riot in Russia, and at the controversy about the bare-breasted women of Ukrainian Femen spreading over the continents and getting media attention everywhere. Take She, the informational glossy for modern urban women in South Sudan. Take the tech-savvy female spokespersons of the Arab Spring. Take young Malala and her international community of supporters. The Indian protesters against rape and the recognition of everyday women's oppression intersecting with the caste system. Think of women's gender and sexuality studies in Western academia as successful products of second-wave feminism. Ponder the latest debates on the problem without a name, 50 years after Betty Friedan's formulation, an analysis made this time by a woman with boardroom experience at both Facebook and Google. Nowadays, institutionalized, you can see from this list that institutionalized and grassroots actualizations of feminism exist. But I have been feeling surrounded by feminist manifestations since, as a high school pupil, I accidentally read the Dutch most famous second-wave feminist novel, The Shame is Over, De Schaamte is Voorbij. And I read this book in the early 90s. So the recurring question about the contemporary existence of a feminist movement has always puzzled me. The first time it was posed to me was as a university student in the late 1990s. Are you sure about your decision to go study women's studies? Feminism is over. Now the question is raised as I am a teacher. Do gender and sexuality studies attract students at all? After all, the emancipation of women has been completed, and gays, lesbians, and queers are fully accepted in today's society. These queries are predicated on a set of assumptions that I wish to unsettle in my work. And I want to address the flaky empirical evidence relied on by my skeptical interlocutors. Feminist theory and continental philosophy have formed a solid base underpinning my initial intuitive perplexity toward those who express uncertainty about the presence and relevance of contemporary feminist movement. Assuming that this is a question which has broader political relevance, and remember that what we try to do here is do we reflect upon epistemology because we have this, and there is this political force behind it in order to, because we want to create an epistemology of the South, maybe, and the question then is, what is that? And where is that epistemology? So my question is, what is at stake in the question about feminism in the here now? First, interrogating the existence of a feminist movement suggests that feminism is a unified whole that can be neatly delineated in spatial terms. This is a generalization, I think, that alludes to homogeny and that repeats what we used to call a logic of one. Feminist philosophers, starting with Simone de Beauvoir's famous Le Deuxième Sexe, The Second Sex, published in 1949, have typified this logic as patriarchal, a theory and practice of divide and conquer based on male supremacy. The partial list of contemporary feminist structures and events that I gave earlier makes clear that feminism today is scattered, just like it has always been, because look at, for instance, liberal feminism's emancipationism, radical feminism separatism, black feminism's intersectionality, and so on and so on. Second, the temporality relied on by my interrogators is deterministic. The assumption is that feminism can be pinpointed along a timeline that neatly follows clock time and the Western calendar. The second feminist wave is especially picked up in such arguments. This 70s social movement is where and when the entire battle against sexism and homophobia is supposed to have been fought. In other words, the cyclical movement suggested by the wave metaphor, perpetual curling, cresting, and breaking, is discarded. The powerful unilinear representation of feminism has paralyzing effects on young people with a critical sensitivity for difference, according to which to be different from means to be worth less than, because difference in itself is of course not a problem. These people, and I think this is about us, at least it's about me, have a creative longing for differing as differences, horizontal and radically open counterpart. And second wave feminists themselves are silenced too, because they appear as nothing but relics of a lost political momentum, whereas they too are all around us. I work with them every day, and I like it. So both assumptions, so the spatial and the temporal assumptions about whether there is a feminism in the here and now, both assumptions have consequences for the ways in which we conceptualize the movement in feminist movement. Scattered, internally split feminist movement is ruled out by a logic of one, which develops into a norm and marks all the rest as deviant, as other. Such a logic is the motor of difference as a hierarchical, pejorative affair. And linear temporality precludes zigzagging feminist movement that seeks to find provisional commonalities in the difference of pressing socio-cultural and political issues and scholarly debates. It rather embraces progress narrative and relies on baseline measurement and quantifiable interim reporting. I want to assert that it is impossible to pinpoint where feminism has started, where it is at, and where it is supposed to lead us. All of these temporal markers start to slide the minute we put them to work. Because was Beauvoir, Simone de Beauvoir, really the first to tackle a certain logic as patriarchal? How big are our successes in the realms of policy, politics, and academia in the West, actually? And to what extent are non-heteronormative sexualities accepted now that right-wing Western parliamentary officials in countries like the Netherlands lay a claim on them, and strange bedfellows in France strike alliances on the expulsion of gays from the legal right to marry? Are Western women emancipated for sure? How is the situation in post-communist countries and post-Soviet states? Has emancipation ever been our sole goal? And was this liberal goal supposed to become the world's leading ideology pertaining to sexual difference? Affirming the creative, playful dynamics that these questions hint at, I seek to dodge deployment of linear temporality, a temporal model built along a rational, fixed and fixating measuring stick, coined spatialized time by the philosopher Henri Bergson. I seize the opportunity to reshuffle the cards based on other empirical facts, the facts that disqualify the application of temporally linear parameters, and hope to establish a notion of feminist movement as predicated precisely on a feminist virtual past that produces contradicting, non-linear feminist positions. So, my allusions to the disjunctions between the logic of one on the one hand and the dynamic process of differing, and between linear temporality and the non-linear experientially defined durée or duration, coined by Bergson too, are simultaneously directed towards feminism, toward takes on feminism from the outside and from feminism's own self-asserted rationale. So I'm not saying that this is only about something that comes from the outside. Feminists may use a logic of one as well, and thus they may also tell progressive stories. In other words, feminism does not necessarily preempt its own dissolution. I find this statement to be of great importance if we're talking about an epistemology of, let's call it, the South for now. Feminism, first of all, can be unbeneficial to itself, and second, the narratives and conceptual tools of certain self-conscious feminists share characteristics with the ones of their critics. Feminism is the struggle against sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and other intersecting forms of structural power imbalances based on naturalization of inequality. Its aim is to dissolve difference, not feminism. But what is feminism then? I think feminism is the movement towards sexual, between brackets, differing. Its aim is to allow for what Deleuze and Guattari have called 1,000 tiny sexes, or what Arun Saldana, a really great young theorist, has called 1,000 tiny races. We could call it 1,000 tiny intersections. Feminism's approach of differing is asymptotic. We will never reach anything. It's about a process. And therefore feminism, in and of itself, never sits still. Feminism only appears to be fixed and fixating when a certain normative representation has taken over. This is the gender or the people that we should become. This representation is either of second-wave feminism as the sole immobilized motor for change, or it is a reference that molds all feminist activity according to a certain type of feminism that is assigned eternal importance. Earlier I mentioned emancipationism or equality feminism in this respect. This implemented form of feminism serves to silence feminist movement in countries like the Netherlands even. Sexual difference here has become an issue of policymakers whose funding can be cut by the government, and of course this is what we see now. In order to leap out of the assumptions just reviewed, I want to experiment and follow the intuition that feminism cannot move either when the contemporaneous feminist practice entails running after the newest theoretical trend, and along the way forgetting all that has been established in the past by what some of my colleagues call feminist foremothers. This argument relates to feminism bringing its own movement to a standstill. It is important to note that a lapse of memory, so forgetting the work of feminist foremothers, is often ascribed to generational feminism, whereas I want to suggest here that a feminism or a politics, I talk about feminism because I want to say something that has broader political implications. So I want to suggest that a feminism or a politics that does not seek transgenerational continuity is more likely to fall into the trap of slavishly following what is out there. And this is, of course, always academia, not necessarily art practices or activist practices. So despite the successes of women's gender and sexuality study scholars in terms of both content and the long march through the academic institution, the dominant paradigms in the social sciences and the humanities are still gender blind and therefore sexist by implication in terms of concept formation and citation index. How can what some people call a male-stream philosopher or heteronormative paradigm ever be the lifesaver of feminism? What I'm proposing is to go back to the futures of the past, and I'm not alone in this. What we here in this seminar take advantage of when making the anachronistic move to Andrade's manifesto, for instance, is related to the discussion about classification, neatly listing and categorizing phenomena or statements, suggesting complete overview, versus cartography, the generation of partial, in the sense of situated, open maps of phenomena or statements. Classificatory or taxonomical approaches to organizing scholarly or artistic work have received famous criticism from Michel Foucault, who opted for cartography in his archaeological and genealogical work. In The Order of Things, Foucault reviews a text fragment discussing a classification that was found in a Chinese encyclopedia by Borges. Foucault's reaction to this text was unstoppable laughter. And this laughter, combined with his analysis that has become a classic case of questioning the scholarly practice of what I call classifixation. The archaeological approach to knowledge, which institutes a form of cartography, a less linear, a less spatial form of dealing with your material as a scholar, enables Foucault to show how grid-like order is produced and how language and things, so word and world, classifier and classified, co-constitute one another in unexpected ways. Nothing, Foucault demonstrates, is natural, nor is it to be approached in a relativistic manner. In other words, there is a world, but it is not out there. According to Foucault, the following questions are on the menu when we want to think differently. He asked, when we establish a considered classification, what is the ground on which we are to establish the validity of this classification with complete certainty? On what table, according to what grid of identities, similitudes, analogies, have we become accustomed to sort out so many different similar things? What is this coherence, which, as is immediately apparent, is neither determined by an a priori and necessary concatenation, nor imposed on us by immediately perceptible contents? End of quote of Foucault. So Foucault's answer to these questions is a most general claim that all classifications exist under the spell of a paradigm, an episteme, as he said, an epistemic formation. Following a classificatory logic, the situatedness of knowledge cannot be theorized or acted upon. Classificatory approaches are founded on the assumption of the ability to logically list categories that mutually exclude one another. A classification is a dualist chart. It proposes that Z is not Y and Y is not X. Everything is presumed to be fully fixed or predetermined, and the author of the classification is assumed to be the neutral mediator between what is out there and what is of the mind. And cartographical approaches complexify all this. I said earlier that the world is not out there. But what I find interesting for us here today is that cartographical approaches also complexify classification, so the ways in which we tend to think and the ways in which we tend to ask questions. So going back to my most paradoxical home then, feminist classificationists have not enumerated feminist categories that are incongruous phenomena or incompatible reflections. Rather, the dualistic nature of classification, which was the main strategy of second-wave feminism, because the idea was that, you know, either I am a radical feminist separatist or a socialist, Marxist, liberal, blah, 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 feminist. And this is what we repeat in teaching. I teach liberal, Marxist, social, black, lesbian, radical, queer, post-colonial feminism. So the idea is that the dualistic nature of such classificatory practices prevent subsequent feminist categories from overcoming the characteristics of the previous classes of this classification. and feminist epistemology as such is prevented from overcoming mainstream epistemology. What I want to propose is that incongruity here is to be found in what is produced when the classification cracks, when feminist epistemology comes to the fore as not being able to be molded according to a pre-existing structure of grids. Yes, so that's what I want to propose. Basically, feminist theory, guided by the methodology of what I call jumping generations, constitutes its own niche vis-à-vis the rationalist assumptions of second-wave feminist classificating, whereby the cracks in the second-wave feminist classification are embraced and the life breathing through them is sought after and followed up. The cracks, not expected and often actively dismissed by second feminist wavers, old and young, allow for feminist futures of diverse feminist categories to remain active, even though the specific progress narrative structure, which runs through textbook accounts of feminism, might suggest otherwise. So let us affirm that second-wave feminism has an access beyond the ways in which it has been classified and canonized. This access has to be actively searched for, because the academic and political world we inhabit is saturated with classificatory processes of canonization. This is how we think. Yeah, that's good. The fact that contemporary feminists are not happy with the silencing act of classification is confirmed by activism, everyday life, and scholarship that wishes to make anachronistic leaps. And here I give some examples. There's a memory boom going on in cultural studies. Anti-historical film research is being done. Performance studies works on reenactment. We know this because of Maaike Bleeker's work, but also because of yesterday's second keynote. There are generous narrations of eco-feminist movements going on, now that we are ourselves interested in sustainability. There are new terms being coined, such as retrofuturism or vintage tomorrows, and this is being done in steampunk studies. Lots of movements, and especially femme movements, are interested in vintage, in how vintage feels. There's so many examples that I can mention. For instance, what we are doing here right now, we are making sure that this age-old idea of the commons is being brought back to life. This lecture is taking place here in a swimming pool that was abandoned, and when you enter it, the question is asked: what can you imagine? What can we do with this space? And what is important, I think, in these anachronistic leaps, so in the idea that what we consider, what we think of it as, old-fashioned, as something of the past, as something that is done, been there, done that kind of, is that there is an access precisely in these practices, an access that is interesting for us in order to leap out of the present that we find uncomfortable because of capitalism, because of post-colonialism, etc. So reinvigorating the futures of the past through cartography does not repeat a linear logic. These futures are part of a virtual past. What is virtual, says Bergson, can be actualized, whilst it is always real. We can say that we are no longer interested in something that we have classified as old-fashioned, but it's still there, it's still active. And what this entails becomes clear in Donna Haraway's take on boundaries. She has said the following: bodies as objects of knowledge are material semiotic generative nodes. Their boundaries materialize in social interaction. Boundaries are drawn by mapping practices. Objects do not pre-exist as such. Again, the world is not out there. Objects are boundary projects. But boundaries shift from within. Boundaries are very tricky. What boundaries provisionally contain remains generative, productive of meanings and bodies. So Haraway's contention confirms that the textual, visual, tangible materials confined in the classes formed by classificatory practices remain active. Cracks create classifications. They are not neatly gridded. And grids can crack at any time. Theorizing classifications as dynamic events asks us to think of cracking as an unexpected potentiality actualized instead of an expected possibility realized according to a plan. The plan of Marxist feminists was to oppose liberal feminism, and this has proven both successful and unsuccessful. It was successful because new political groups were generated, each with their own epistemology, but it was also unsuccessful because liberal feminism was confirmed as something that we should move beyond, so it was actually given prominence. Just like how liberal feminist emancipationism has always been more than a liberal wiping out of difference, because it invited women as a group to ask questions. The potentiality of materialist feminism has always been to push horizontal subject-object relations to the limit, rather than confirming master-slave logics. Such leaps into the unknown are at work in all classificatory projects. Cartographical projects taking advantage of these dynamics do not make a difference between the unsuccessful and the successful in such a sense. And here I want to refer to something that happened on the first day of this event, when the suggestion was made in the discussion of the three texts that Andrade's manifesto was written from a white elitist position. I think that this was a very strong identity political statement that worked according to classificatory logic, because the idea was it's written from a white elite, we have to put it aside. But at the same time, what we had constantly been talking about was the fact that this manifesto had gone viral, if we want to use that term. The effects have been such that all kinds of power hierarchies have been broken through. So it doesn't matter who has written or from where this manifesto has been written. And this, noticing this or mentioning this white elite, should we then really throw away the manifesto for its elitism or its whiteness, according to which it has not worked? Because we read in the presentation of the manifesto that from 1928 till the 1960s and now today, the 2010s, this manifesto is still generating all kinds of important questions and practices. Let me think now, let me look at the time. So what I find, I think that from now on I'm just going to talk from the top of my head. This whole meditation on my particular feminist, location, and the fact that it is from this location that I constantly want to go back to the past, or that I'm constantly being drawn to the past, to the feminist past, in order to find lessons or statements that I find inspiring for today or for the future. I always call this a generational position. I mentioned this earlier. And I've done some research on the concept of generation and its etymology, because when I present my work in a feminist context, I'm always being accused of, well, you say that you're interested in the past, in the feminist past, but still you're talking from a very young and very present contemporary perspective. So generational feminism is considered to evoke this whole notion of every feminist should be young, and we do feminism, we do this for the young, and there was even somebody that criticized my work and said that the rest of us is dead or dying, and I thought this can be my work. This is not what I'm trying to do. So doing research on the notion of generation, I found out that generation, in fact, has two etymological roots. It has a double etymological root, so to speak. And this, again, refers to this event here in Portugal. Because the first root of generation is, of course, the idea of a class, a generational class, a genus, something that can be boxed, an age cohort, youth or the youngish or the old or whatever. But at the same time, it has this etymological root that is literally to come into being. It's to generate or generating. And for me, it's because of this double etymological root that generation that I got confirmed in my intuition to work from a generational perspective and to work with materials of the past, of the feminist past, because this double root basically teaches us that any object can be approached from two perspectives, either from this perspective of according to which we can classify it, or we can approach it from the perspective of how it has actually come into being, how it has emerged. And this whole notion of emergence we have also heard many times during this conference. So to generate, and this generational process, of course, goes on and on. So when we talk about specific texts or specific statements or specific slogans or figures of feminism or of post-colonialism or of anti-racism or of whatever kind of political action, I think we can approach it as something that is fully fixed and something that is finished and something that is out there, something that we must classify. But we can also approach it from this force that is still, I think, running through the object or the project that we're dealing with. And this force, this generative force, will never stop. We can still tap into this particular force. A manifesto is something that excites us. So classifying it and saying that, hey, this is maybe something that we can call white or that was produced in the West, I think this is never a very productive moment. I think approaching such text like a manifesto or simply, we heard this in the first presentation, approaching a text that we find in a newspaper, this from the point of view of its generation, of its coming into being, make sure that it never stops functioning, and it can still we can still take it with us in our political struggles. So an epistemology that is worth investing in today for us, whether we want to work on epistemologies of the South or more ecological approaches or feminist approaches, can find many objects of the past, of the present, that still have this force running through them, and we can actually actively search for this particular force. And it is, of course, it is not that there are no moments of stopping, because when you approach an object from its coming into being, this doesn't mean that there are no racisms or that all these analyses are worthless. I think what the notion of generation in its double meaning can show is precisely the fact that there is a certain force, there is a certain production process that can go both ways. That can either have this utopian horizontalizing effect, and it can also have this stifling effect. That's basically what I wanted to say here, especially because we started working with particular texts that spoke to the organizers of this conference. And what I want to suggest is that we keep accumulating these kinds of texts and approach them from what they can become instead of how we've become accustomed to looking at them. and through the lenses that we've become accustomed to looking at them, and to also continue searching for texts, objects, performances, that haven't been classified yet, but that need a place on our very open and very lively map. That's what I wanted to say.
Posso tirar o microfone? Thank you again. Thank you, Iris, for your wonderful contribution to our discussion. We hope we can discuss a lot of these issues tomorrow. There was a lot of food for thought, but we are in need for other kind of food right now as well. But this was already the first dish of the evening meal. And I also would like to thank not only your presence here, but Tiago and Nuno, and especially Tiago for his athletic promptness in saving the presentation today. You've been great. Thanks.